I like to kick off guest conversations by letting the guest introduce themselves. And would you mind starting us off by letting us know how you'd like the listeners to know you and what feels most forward about how you're showing up today?
Yeah, so my name is Sarah, and I'm a clinically trained herbalist who also works on like the community spectrum and teaches foundational herbalism to people so they can bring plants into their day-to-day life in a really joyful way. That's been my focus in my herbal practice in more recent years. But I also work with people one-on-one, and um, I'm also an astrologer, so a lot of the work that I do is focused on the relationship between plants and planets. And then I also bring nutrition into my work. I'm very much an interdisciplinary practitioner and I love learning lots of new things. So I do lots of different things in my work. And I really think, I was actually talking to someone about this the other day. I really think my ultimate calling as a person in the world, I hesitate to say my purpose, because I don't really think we have like a set in stone purpose, but my calling is really to help people come into a deeper relationship with the world around them, like the more than human world. And herbalism and astrology and the various modalities that I practice are doorways into that. So pretty much everything I do is oriented around that goal.
For sure. That makes sense. And I can also relate a lot to that kind of interdisciplinary nature. It's sort of kind of harnessing or pulling in a lot of different interests and things into one.
Yeah. I mean, as you can see behind me, here's my yoga wall. Like I was a yoga teacher for years and I have so many certifications and I'm always in a new program. So I always find it difficult to describe what I do.
Same. I get
It's like,
sweaty. I get people like, what do you do? I'm like sweating instantly.
so I am the goal, the aspiration is to be a connector between people and the more than human world. And I tend to focus on plants.
Yeah, exactly. Plants come up a lot.
Yeah, that's the primary focus of my work.
Yeah. I think that's a good kind of jumping off point into one of the bigger topics that I think we wanted to talk about today. For me, really loving into the sentience of the world is something that's brought a lot of healing for me and is always bringing forward just the amount of life that we have access to, the amount of magic, for lack of a better word, that we have access to. And I know for you, Taki, you just posted an article talking about connecting with plant spirits, which to me feels kind of like a gateway into this animism conversation. But would you mind talking to us a little bit more about that, why that matters, and kind of how that perspective or those practices inform how we're walking through the world?
Yeah, so you mentioned the word animism, which is what we're really talking about here. And a lot of people have no touchstone on what animism is, or they view animism through the lens of how it's been talked about in academia. And um, there are a lot of negative connotations to the word animism from its origins. Like the term animism itself was coined by a Victorian anthropologist. His name was Sir Edward Burnett Tylor, and he coined it in the late 1800s. And he defined the term from observing various cultural worldviews, essentially. But he coined the term through his own lens of Christianity and Christian hegemony, and really like denigrated the indigenous people and worldviews that he was observing at the time. So animism is kind of a fraught term, and there's no one definition for it. A lot of people, when you bring up the concept of animism, will say that it means that there are many spirits in the world, and that all things are inspirited, from rivers, lakes, mountains, stones, plants, animals, to also I say objects in quotations because I don't want to objectify any beings, but objects like books and your car and your house and all of these different things. Um, but that's a really like simplistic definition of animism, and various cultures have different perspectives on what they identify as being inspirited. But the thing to know about animism is that it doesn't belong to any particular culture. It is like the most fundamental worldview of being a human, and being in relationship with the earth. And it can be traced back to pretty much every indigenous culture. and spiritual practice from like the first human migration out of Africa. Like it's so, it predominates human culture. It's everywhere.
Yeah, it feels a little bit, talking about the word animism and contextualizing, it feels a little bit like the word shaman, where it feels similar in the sense that it's like someone trying to take all of the nuance and the subtleties that we find in different cultures throughout the world and like categorizing them as some academic student of anthropology and like from their own
Yeah.
perspective. It feels like there's a similar complexity with the word. I don't know if you agree with that, but
No, I do. I mean, it's like the word shaman, which is specifically a word describing a particular community role of various indigenous, like Siberian tribes.
exactly.
Like that word has been transformed and like expanded upon to describe a variety of different spiritual roles and community roles that can be similar to that structure, but is not the self name that maybe like the quote unquote shaman of that culture would describe themselves as. So unfortunately, English is a very limiting language.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've had the discussion with other animists or people who hold that type of worldview, um, on whether we should continue to use the word animism because
Mm-hmm.
it has such fraught origins, um, and is weaponized by academics in some ways and anthropologists and religious scholars in a way that makes it seem like it's the practice of the savagery, the barbarians, the unevolved people, and that's just, it makes me
So
even like,
gross.
yeah, it makes me feel icky to even name that. But the only reason why we even need to define what animism is today is because we live in a world and in like a culture, that the overculture, I'm not talking about our individual cultural backgrounds, but we live in a wider culture that doesn't see the world as alive. Um, and this has real world implications, like down to policy. And I think animism is such an important topic to discuss with people, because if more people were animists, or at least were respectful of that being a worldview that many people hold. I know it's not for everyone, but we can hold space for varying belief systems and ways of being in the world. If more people were animists or respected animism, then lakes and rivers would have personhood and we wouldn't be constantly polluting them. We wouldn't have so much, like, I just read an article last week that said that the rainwater is no longer safe to drink
Yeah.
worldwide, even in remote locations, because there's just so much microplastic in the ocean that is seeding the clouds. And so now we are all being constantly exposed to endocrine disrupting chemicals through rainwater. How that is going to implicate our food system, I don't know. And I'm absolutely terrified to find out. But I don't think we can fully fix the damage we have done to this planet, but we can move forward in a better way. And animism is a worldview that demands us to take action, um, in through reciprocity, like in a way that is truly honoring the beingness of the various persons, human and non-human alike, that we share this world with.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm thinking of, I think the Fungi Foundation was instrumental in getting some policy passed in Chile, where basically fungi have rights now. It's like before you do
Yeah,
like a building project or you do like, you have to consider like the cost to fungi and how that basically that species will be protected, as like that is fucking mind blowing. And like
that's awesome.
that's how it should be, like with water, with things. And unfortunately things like our food system are like contributing to water that we can't drink, and
Yeah.
things like that. So yeah, I very much agree with the things that you said, and like how we would eat differently, how we would walk through the world differently, how our needs might shift if we considered ourselves in constant relationship with the world around us. And I think it speaks a lot, especially to the English language, which is, in so many ways a language that has been one of colonialism, that there isn't one
Mhm.
for, we don't have a word for the world is alive. I
Yeah.
think that says a lot.
And you know, what was I, how will I phrase this? English very much is a language of colonialism, and in other languages around the world, especially various like indigenous to Turtle Island peoples and their languages. From my understanding, I don't want to describe them as a monolith. Every individual culture and language is very, very different. But from my understanding, many indigenous peoples throughout the world and in this place um, have so many different words for the aliveness of the world, have so many different words for particular types of expression of that aliveness, for like seasons, for water, for snow, for all of these different things that are descriptive and really great guideposts for understanding the world, but are also reflective of personhood. Um, I wish that I actually knew my native language. I wasn't taught it. My my mom speaks Russian, but our family speaks a particular dialect of Persian that was forced, like we were forced to assimilate into speaking Russian in the USSR. And so my mom never learned it, and then she didn't teach me Russian growing up either. So I am very limited by the language of English. But even in Russian, which is also a language of colonialism, there are so many things that cannot translate to
Hmm.
English. You can't get the gist even of particular phrases and words. So I read something recently about indigenous language preservation and how important it is for ecological preservation, because when we lose the ability to know what these words mean, like they will not translate.
Yeah.
We will
Yeah.
lose their essence.
We lose that way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
I think that's true. And I love languages. I'm a big nerd on languages. And even I find too, I mean, from like Scottish Gaelic or even Japanese or a lot of other languages that are, they have like such a softening around, like in English, it's really hard when you're speaking to not be like, I. And in so many other
Mhm.
languages, like it's, the ego part or the self-oriented part of how they speak is just really soft, and it's a very different way of speaking. It's more like we're painting the world around us as opposed to like I'm taking action through the world, which is very much how English is. And yeah, I think that's a really I think it's an important thing to notice whether or not someone has an interest in learning other languages, and I know not everyone gets that privilege to choose whether or not they're learning another language. um but yeah, that there are just so many ways of moving through the world. And most of
Mhm.
them, I feel like, are a lot softer about how our presence here matters and what that means.
Well,
Um,
and many of them are inherently place-based. Like my
for sure.
partner is third generation Irish, so a little extended out. His great grandparents migrated here from Galway, and so he's been learning Irish Gaelic. And so much of the language is oriented in relationship to place,
Hmm.
and that's how humans have always been living, with the exception of these last few hundred years of scientific materialism and industrialization and the forced, like it's not natural to be living separate from nature. There, like nature doesn't even exist. There's nature is a colonial construct.
Hmm.
The idea of nature, because we are part of nature. So the forced separation between humans and what we will call nature had to be directed under industrialization to justify human exploitation of the world,
Hmm.
um, removing people from the land and putting them into cities. Like that is an example of the forced disconnection. And of course, there are many benefits to having. We are talking on a computer, we are speaking to each other through a screen. We wouldn't have had this type of technology if it wasn't for that type of scientific innovation. But it's very disconnecting.
Hmm. Yeah. And
And
it
like
brings into
separating.
question.
Oh, go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
I was just going to say, and it brings into question, it's like, is exploitation necessary for innovation? Which I don't know that it has to be, but
I
that
think a
begs the question for
particular
me.
the type of innovation that we are seeing in the world right now, like people wanting to move into the metaverse, that is a type of innovation and innovative technology. Cool, but absolutely
Maybe.
reliant on exploitation. Yeah, maybe not for me, but I can understand why someone would think it was pretty cool. I won't even let I don't even have, like, devices in my house. I have 3 cats, and I'm very much a little bit of a obsessive person with tidiness in my home. So my 3 cats ruin my floor every day. Like, I have to sweep my floor every single day, and we were considering getting a vacuum, like a robot vacuum, and then I saw that Amazon was buying Roomba, and I was like, "Do I really want Amazon to have the blueprints of the interior of my house?
Not really.
No, I guess I'm just gonna vacuum every day," you know? Like, we don't have like, many devices that a lot of people have these days in their homes for convenience. Um, like the Bluetooth technology to be able to play music in every room of the house. Like, I live in a small house, there would be no reason to buy it in the first place, but, that type of innovation is cool, and something like the metaverse, for example, how many server farms are they gonna have to run to maintain that type of constant internet usage? And what type of metals are they going to have to mine to make the materials that they're going to use for those computers that are gonna run those servers? How much pollution are they going to be emitting from these just warehouses
How
filled
much
with
energy are
computers?
they gonna need?
Are they using renewable energy? Probably not. Like, I know that I work online, so at I am using someone's server farm somewhere to be able to do my work. Um, and I don't love that, but I also don't think that I don't think I can fully eliminate my footprint on using online um, technology. But can we make it less disruptive to the world?
Yeah, for sure. It's like everything
Less
comes
exploitative?
with a cost, and it's yeah, everything comes with a cost, basically. Like there's no, it's just this cool experience that actually, in my opinion, pulls us even further out of our embodied experience, which
Yeah.
in my opinion is why we're here on the planet, but that's fine. And so
We're in
um
alignment on that.
so it's an interesting thing. And so I guess to reroute us back towards plant spirits and like ways of connecting with them, like if this is a new concept for people, or it's something they're wanting to engage with more intimately as a practice of being more connected to the place and the plants around them, as a way of getting more immersed in an embodied way with the world around them, how would you begin to journey that with someone?
Um, well, for starters, I mean, adopting an animist worldview, depending on the type of culture you are, I mean, if you're living in the Western world, you are living under a culture of um, disconnection and like cultural Christianity, and just look at what's happening in the government and stuff to see that. So even if you aren't Christian, like you are very much interfacing with cultural Christianity, which doesn't have to be a form of disconnection, but the way that it is weaponized as a form of state power, like absolutely is. And that's been happening for over 1,000 years. Um, but even though we are living under that culture, we all still have an inherent connection to nature. No matter how disconnected we are or how much we put our blinders on to observing that connection, like it's there. You live in a house made of wood. Where did that wood come from?
Mhm.
There are trees outside that help you breathe. You're gonna say that you're not in a relationship with plants? Like they're everywhere. The clothes that you're wearing, you know, unless you're just wearing plastic. Like I'm
Yeah.
wearing linen. This linen came from the earth. The dye that dyed it came from the earth. We are already in a relationship with nature all the times. And so stepping into an animist worldview first requires us to recognize this that we are a part of the world, that there's no separation between us, that we are meant to be in community with the world, and that continuously separating ourselves from our larger community, which includes everything, not just people, but it includes all of the beings around you. trees, plants, animals, land spirits, incarnate and discarnate spirits alike, which might be too much for some people to accept when they first uh, begin to explore animism. But the first step is recognizing that we have this connection and that we are supposed to have this connection.
Yeah, 100%. Like realizing that already your existence is an intersection and relies on these other beings in a way that even just like restoring our attention and our awareness to that begins to generate some kind of loop of potential reciprocity, I think. Like restoring that noticing. Um, what are some of the things that have been coming up a lot? I know culturally and in sessions with individuals, but also just like the way news and articles and things like that are coming up is that like nervous system health is really starting to become more in the common sphere, which I feel really grateful for. Um, but a lot of things, especially around like extremes or wounds around nervous system health, particularly related to like burnout, anxiety, depression is kind of a common big three. I think, overwhelm can be related to some of those things as well. But I think I'm interested in some of your perspective or some of your intersections around nervous system health, what that means about and with our connection to the natural world and how plants can maybe help us with some of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I would really say that so much of the anxiety and what would be the right word? Just like our heightened response to the world, and I'll say to the way humans are interacting with the world, um, has a root cause in this. Like, one of the root causes of this is this disconnection that has been forced onto us. Because one of the most nourishing things for the nervous system is to be in nature, and that has been observed in most cultures across the world. And everyone can feel that. You go for a walk and you turn off your phone and you don't listen to a podcast while you're going. I'm guilty of this. I like to talk on the phone when I walk, so I will often just kind of disassociate from my surroundings and be in a conversation. But if you purposefully take that time away from distractions, um, and allow yourself to sink into your senses in a way that can be very difficult for us when we're constantly getting all sorts of sensory input all the time. And you begin to really just look at the trees and notice what's happening around you. You feel a sense of embodiment that you perhaps cannot connect to or have difficulty connecting to when you're working, you're at your desk, you're talking on the phone, you're going to your meetings, all these different things, attending to our modern life rather than a human life. Like, being connected with nature is very much just being a human. I heard something recently, or I might have like scrolled past it in an Instagram story or something, where I wish I knew the name. I should have looked at it more so I could cite this person. So I don't know who it was, but they said something along the lines of like what we would call today, what we describe as modern somatics. It's just the way our ancestors were living their lives.
Yeah.
Like, we have all of these tools and practices, but, and I'm not going to like look at our ancestors through these rosy glasses and like try to say that their lives were perfect, that they had it all figured out, because they were very much people um, with flaws and differences and all of these things. But even just when we were living in a time of like being hunter gatherers, just the act of going and gathering your food is a type of embodiment practice
Yeah. And it
that,
slows you down.
yeah, it slows you down. It shifts your sensory awareness and your perception, and it gets you in your body. And we have to now create, there's a whole field of embodiment coaching and all of these different things, um, that people are now making money off of, which, sure, like, you get paid fairly for your work. I'm not saying don't make money off of it, but we have now like capitalized human stuff to find a sense of reconnection again. And I think it's a step, like it's a step towards a more embodied existence. But we already know what to do to feel embodied. innately. And like being in nature helps to awaken that.
Hmm. I'm even thinking about how just the way walking with like different kinds of shoes, like we didn't always have like rubber soled shoes walking through the world, and how we tread differently. We walk slow, we like, we tread differently without that. The way that we're receiving the earth and the biome and the frequency, like up through our bodies and into our feet, like is just so different now. Like even just like this way that we're walking on the earth, there's this level of like protection, I think. And I'm saying protection in quotes, between us and like where we are, which and I think nature is, again, nature in quotes, for me, nature with a capital N. It is a wild and dangerous thing, right? Like it's not this like tame, like nature is like a cute little teddy bear that we go out and like pet
Yeah.
and feel better. But it's also that that's just the image. It's not a Care Bear. But it's also like that is the environment that we are here to be in, right? Like that kind of like
Yeah.
wild and yeah.
Humans belong to the earth.
Hmm.
You know, there's no other place for us to be.
Yeah.
As far as we know, we don't exist anywhere else in the known universe. We were made, like born and bred here from the same ancestors, and I'm talking about like atoms and like the original single-celled organisms. We come from the same ancestral lineage that created all life on this planet.
Hmm.
Those things branched out in many different ways
Yeah,
over
we're
billions of
like
years, but we crawled out of the cosmic soup just like everything else, you know?
Mhm. Totally. Just like I think, like how closely we are related to fungi. Like we're basically like walking trees. I kind of think we're like trees that wanted to move, or things that trees grew up so they could have something to like breathe in and out of. Like I think we're just like just those opposite lungs breathing one another. Or
Well, and
I
that's
think,
another interesting thing to think about in terms of the relationships we are already in, whether we observe them or not. There are more bacteria and various microorganisms living inside of us and
hmm,
on us than the own cells that we have that make up our beingness in the world.
hmm, it's true.
And we need the relationship. Like the microbiome that we have on our skin is incredibly important for our immune function.
Hmm.
If we lived in a completely sterile environment of just human and
We'd
nothing
be
else,
dead.
yeah, it would
There's no
not be good
such
for
thing.
us.
Like there's no such thing. Like we are a conglomeration of all of these other life forms. Like we wouldn't exist, I think.
And so we are a part of that, of that like intensity of nature as well. Nature is not just the backdrop of your life. And this is why well, lots of people have discussed this, but like the problematic nature of national parks, and even the conservation movement of just trying to hold these places in stasis so that we can go and enjoy them as the backdrop of our day, rather than recognizing something like a national park, which is really an indigenous garden that has been cultivated for centuries until the US government took them. And now we have all sorts of problems in these environments, like wildfires now being a yearly occurrence on the West Coast, and droughts and all sorts of things. Um, but we've created this idea of nature that we no longer participate in and we can just view. But if we look at like, uh, again, with the example of a national park being an indigenous garden, the health and the structure and the thriving of those ecosystems depend on human intervention.
Hmm.
It is human ingenuity and relationship with those lands through years of observation and generations of trial and error that helped to shape vibrant, robust ecosystems. So a lot of people say, well, humans are the problem. If humans were gone, the world would be a better place. Maybe, but also we have played a vital role as a species in supporting the world we live in. And that's even more evidence that shows us that like we are a part of nature. So we need to start acting like it.
Yeah. As opposed to like, and I think it's, and what you're bringing up so many complex things. It's like, it's more like, I think we have systems from which we should protect nature.
Yeah.
And but I'm totally in agreement with what you're saying, is that because we are a part of the ecology, like we are not inherently a damaging effect to the world around us. But
Yeah.
actually we can collaborate and co-create and be as not even functional, an essential part of the ecosystem that we're in, as much as a tree would be.
And that is like a requirement, I would say, is um, that is the calling of people, that is our purpose. Um, but capitalism is in direct competition with that. And so, yeah, I think protecting nature from capitalism, but protecting that nature also means like controlled burns,
For sure.
and doing things that support the ecology there rather than just like
Putting a
leaving
fence
things
around it.
untouched. Yeah.
Yeah. Like a
We
football
have to
field.
participate. We have to
Yeah.
participate and fulfill our ecological role. But bringing that back to the nervous system, beginning that participation process is such an incredible way to find a sense of grounding. And it's simple. It's like growing a garden or
Mm.
growing a plant in a pot on your patio, um, or walking around barefoot. My neighbors look at me like I'm nuts sometimes because I'll just be holding my shoes walking down the street
Mm-hmm.
barefoot. But I take daily walks throughout our yard barefoot. It takes a while to get used to. I've been walking barefoot in some pretty rugged places since I was very little. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't get pedicures. I have very strong calluses on my feet.
Yeah.
And I want it that way. I don't want to be too sensitive to be able to walk in nature. It's always rough in sweet gum season, though.
For
I've
sure.
stepped on a lot of
For
nature's
sure.
Legos.
For sure.
um, and then aside from just spending time in what we call nature, there are so many plants um, and beings that can give us tangible nervous system support. Like as an herbalist, there are so many incredible plants that live on a wide range of accessibility that can support you in cultivating embodiment and cultivating safety with embodiment, because we can learn every somatic practice that exists and still struggle with feeling safety in being in our body.
Yeah.
um, and that is like so prevalent, especially after these last few years where we're experiencing so much visceral unsafety because of medical crisis and climate collapse and changing variables all around us. It's hard to feel safe.
For sure. For sure. What are some of your favorite herbs, plants for that kind of thing? I know that is a complicated
It's so
question to
hard.
ask an herbalist, because you're like, well, this only in this case with these three other things. So like we're
Well,
not
and
giving
it's
anyone
really,
medical advice.
yeah, no. Well, and what I'll say is this: there's like two classes. Well, okay, well, there's like two classes and the subclasses underneath them, but there's two. This is
It's okay.
exactly what
I
you
already
said.
knew that when I asked the question. So
Yeah. But we have like nervine plants and we have adaptogenic plants. And adaptogenic plants are all the rage over the last couple of years
mhm.
for, again, like exploitative reasons.
Yeah.
Um, Adaptogens have a non-specific effect on the body that tends to support the various systems in the body that we would attribute to our resiliency. But they're non-specific. Adaptogens don't just have an effect on like your adrenals or just have an effect on this body system. They have a pretty broad action. Um, and everyone loves adaptogens because they can help you push past your limits and be productive, I say in quotes. They can,
Which Americans are obsessed with.
yeah, everyone's putting ashwagandha in their coffee, and like that's a pretty good one, but that'll help build some stronger well of resilience and not just help you keep pushing through. But people tend to reach for adaptogens first rather than nervines. Nervine herbs are, again, broad. They have a effect on the nervous system. And you have a spectrum of nervines. You have nervines that are very sedating, put you to sleep, and that like help with pain. You have nervines that are very restorative. They help to build the nervous system, and support your resilience by filling up your well. And then you have nervines that are stimulants, like coffee is a nervous system stimulant. It is a nervine. People take nervines every day. They just might take them on one end of the spectrum or another. And nervines are the herbs I wish more people would reach for first, but they're not as sexy and they take longer forms of engagement. When you're working with restorative nervines, you're working with them for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months to a year to experience the kind of support and resilience they have to offer. And a lot of those nervines are also really rich in like vitamins and minerals, and they're helping to replenish your body in a way that potentially other plants might not. Adaptogens, you can take a couple of doses of an adaptogen for a couple of days and start to notice an effect. And there is a place for that. But usually, traditionally, adaptogenic herbs are used in people who are so burnt out, like they have been dealing with chronic illness for a very long time. There's a lot of atrophy going on for them, or if they're experiencing the kind of degeneration that happens as we get older.
Mm.
They're not 20-year-olds who are working 60 hours a week who
And like to
need a
support
little
bad
bit of an
work habits.
exercise. Yeah. And that's unfortunately how a lot of people engage with plants, and that's exploitative. That's extractive.
Yeah, I agree. I think something that I think plants really, and I think so about caring, we're like, well, I just can't keep a plant alive. I'm like, well, learn how to keep a plant alive. Like learn how to do it. Like, cause it's like, that's like the Saturn in me talking. I'm like, figure it out.
Yeah.
Because it is I do think it is part of who we are as humans. Cause it's like, yes, you can. We just need to we need to change to become the kind of person who can generate life around us.
And it takes listening, and it takes time, and it takes orienting yourself in the world in maybe a different way than you have been trained to. Um, Anyone can grow anything now. And this is something I will say. People always ask me about my garden. I grow like more than 400 different species of plants on my quarter acre here in Atlanta.
Mm,
My garden is kind of wild looking, but it is a dang oasis
mm-hmm.
in this little corner of my neighborhood. You walk by, people just like slow down when they walk in front of my house. It's so cute to see. And we see all sorts of people stop and look at my rose hips that are like the size of crab apples and freak out. And
Mm.
they see the mullein climbing, and they've never seen a plant like that before. And I've sparked so much curiosity. But people always ask me, Sarah, how do you grow so many plants? What do you do? What's your schedule?
Are you using Miracle Grow?
Yeah, they're like, are you fertilizing? What's your watering schedule? What is all this? I do like nothing. I mean, I weed when I need to, but we've created an environment where I don't have to weed very often. Um, I don't really have to water, especially not in this
Not in
weird,
Atlanta
like,
this year.
yeah, this constant rain we're having. Um, because when you spend time deeply listening to the environment and honoring those plants' needs, you can create a robust ecosystem in which they take care of each other
Yep,
and then take care of you.
it's
But
true.
that requires putting animism. This requires honoring those plants' preferences and needs above your own. As an animist, it is completely antithetical to my values to exert a dominating influence on any being around me. Like, I cannot say, well, I really want to grow roses here. Like, I want those roses to grow here. When those roses are like, I don't want to grow here. This is not a good
I
spot
don't,
for me.
yeah.
The roses are going to struggle. They're going to have a hard time. I'm not going to get beautiful, lush roses. Eventually, that rose bush is going to die.
Yeah, unless you like chock it full of poison like 5 times a year, which is like,
Right.
again, not helpful for you or the roses or the land or the
Or the
water.
land. So instead, I can say, well, roses, what environment do you need? And now I have a beautiful um, hedge of roses. They're thrilled. and bloom like all summer long, even though they're not supposed to. I also just, my lot of cultivation is in Cancer. I have an exalted Venus. I'm good at growing things. But
But it's a
I didn't,
skill, right? Like
it's
you're not
it's a
like,
skill, and it's a skill of listening.
mhm. Yeah.
Um, and herbalism is very much that type of practice. When we approach herbs saying, "Oh, milky oats, I hear you're good for the nervous system," which that is one of my favorite nervine triphos starters. It's good, pretty much good for everyone. Um, Most people can take it, with exceptions always. Like, again, not medical advice. Talk to an herbalist or go read my monographs and my programs, because that's one of the plants that I've covered there. But milky oats, someone hears, "Oh, I hear you really help with anxiety." So I'm just going to take a dropper, and I've never seen you, I've never grown you, I have no idea what you even look like besides the oats in my oatmeal in the morning. And I don't know what your preferences are. I don't know anything about you, but I'm just going to take you and I'm going to get that anxiety reducing benefit. And I'm never going to think of you ever again. Versus the experience of growing milky oats like I did this year. And I should have planted them later, because now I know. Every winter we have the migration of the red-winged blackbirds,
Mhm.
where like 500 birds will just like touch down in your yard and then lift up and go to the next yard and the next yard. And because I have such a vibrant ecosystem in my yard, they stayed here because I had tons of seeds for them to eat. So they were just like hanging out in our yard for a week or two. And I stupidly planted the oats right before their migration. So I planted like 3 pounds of oats and they took almost all of the seeds. So my experience of milky oats growing it started that way. I had to give an offering to the red-winged blackbirds. Then my milky oats came up. They were looking really good. I was weeding them, making sure they were doing well. And then right when they started to make the milky actual oats that we harvest, which is a little bit of a tedious process, and you need a lot to get a decent amount to work with medicinally. Like the squirrels or the chipmunks, some creature took half of my milky oats harvest. Every day I would walk back there and the stalks would just be crushed down to the ground and you could see someone was nibbling at it. So I got even less milky oats. And then I had to actually harvest all of the milky oats and weigh what I had and turn it into a tincture. And then I got to take the tincture and get the benefit of the milky oats. But that was a process from like February to June.
Yeah.
And there were so many other beings that interacted with that milky oats. It was
Yeah.
like a very long process of deep observation and listening before I ever got to yield my own benefit of taking milky oats and feeling it calm my nervous system. And when we don't interact with the plants in that way and we just buy an herb farm tincture off the shelf, which like there's no problem in doing that, it's a good starting place. Um, but when we just do that and we don't look at these plants even deeper, it is very easy to fall into a more extractive relationship with them, where we aren't honoring their needs and preferences and we aren't honoring who they are as people, just non-human ones.
Right. Which will also reduce our benefit as well.
Yeah, I mean, growing the milky oats was certainly a lot of the medicine of then getting to take it.
Mhm.
Um, and I just use that plant as a example of a nervine, but there are so many others, and there are also nervines that help to calm the nervous system. There are exhilarants which help to uplift the nervous system and bring joy and happiness. So needed in these times.
Yeah, for sure.
There are herbs that have an affinity for grief. There are herbs that have an affinity for the kind of nervousness that erupts as digestive issues. Um, there are so many herbs we can be in relationship with them and in relationship with, and so many of them do so many things.
Mhm.
So there are many herbs that might be the herb for a certain kind of person, and another one that might be an herb for the other kind of person. Like my partner is a blue vervain person. That is the nervine for my partner. I am more of a rose person. I can
Yeah.
take rose or Monarda. Like bee balm is my nervine. That is my number one herb. Um, I can take bee balm for like anything that affects me, and it has such a soothing effect for my own body.
Wow.
So I have a deep relationship with that plant because I've spent so much time with them.
Mhm.
You don't need 100 herbs in your home apothecary. You probably need like 10, and you just need a good relationship with them, and you need to know how vast their medicine is.
Yeah. Yeah, I like framing it within the context of relationship, and everyone on the podcast is like, stop talking about your garden, Mary Grace. But it's just been such a I don't care. It's been such a yeah, just though I've learned, so it's been like 3 years now. And just like every year it's like, oh, everything went yellow this year. Oops, like what, and this year it's like, okay, like now I have to learn like what plants want to be with each other and which ones don't want
Hmm.
to be next to each other. Which one, and learning, I don't know, it's that kind of attention, noticing when it's raining, noticing when it's not raining. How long has it been since it's rained? What's growing? Oh, some bugs ate that. Is that okay? Because like bugs need food too. And then what happens if,
Mhm.
and so what kind of, yeah, it's just it brings a lot more aliveness to me. And so when I have my, tomato and cucumber sandwich and those things, I can't stop growing cucumbers this year, apparently. Um,
Oh, I'm jealous. The dang cucumber beetles wrecked mine about a month ago.
I'm sorry. It's just it's such a gift. And it really has changed me as a person, like having hash browns in the morning and I like pull the potatoes out of my garden to like it completely
Right?
changes me. And a lot of that is the tending, and it's me out there like in my underwear at 6 a.m. just because I like drink my coffee, and it's not like, sure, it takes work, but it takes mostly just attention and presence. Like I'm out there with my coffee
Yeah.
in the morning. We're just walking around and like cruising to see how everybody's doing. And it'll be like a weed
Right?
here and a weed there. Like it's not 6 hours of hard labor every day, because if you just set them up again, like you said, to like have what they need, which is also a great way we can talk about human persons, then so much just goes really right. So
Yeah, plants want to grow.
yeah, they do. They want to make a lot of babies. Like they
Yeah.
want to make a lot of themselves. And like, yeah.
And we have been supporting that process as well. Rose is such a wonderful example of the human relationship with plants. It's always a plant that I like to teach people about, especially because a lot of people come and ask me about ancestral herbalism. How do
Mm.
I connect with the plants of my people when I don't know who my people are? And my answer is always like, well, the plants are your people, like
Yeah.
all of them.
Yeah.
And rose is such a good example of this because rose is initially indigenous to Central Asia and like modern day Iran
Mm.
and Uzbekistan and where my family is from. So I have a deep affinity with rose. But rose has spread itself everywhere. There are roses that are native to the so-called North America. There are roses all throughout Europe. There are roses everywhere. And essentially, the story goes that people loved roses so much that they took them with them when they
Mm.
migrated. And humans, like, there are thousands of different cultivars of roses that we bred because we love them. We bred
Mm-hmm.
them to have big, juicy, luscious blooms that were beautiful in every single color. Like there are lilac roses, there are so many different shades of pink and orange and yellow and white roses, purple roses, so many kinds. We bred them to have juicier hips so we could have better fruit. We bred them to smell
Amazing.
differently. Like the reason why there are so many roses in the world is because humans cultivated a relationship with them and we're like borderline obsessed with roses.
I think that's true.
Um, And so when people are like, how do I engage with the plants that are of my people? It's very likely that so many of the plants that exist in the world have a relationship with all peoples because people have always been sharing them. I don't want to dismiss the reality of like a cultural appropriation and dismiss on the need to honor various lineages of knowledge. Um, but there's far more cultural diffusion of plants around the world than people necessarily observe. Um, and like rose is all of our ancestor in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Same with plants like elderberry. Like the oldest elderberries found in the archaeological record were in the Paleocene of Europe, and that plant is native to every single like place in the temperate world almost. It was used in ancient Egypt. It was used in Asia. It was used in North America. Um, it was used in, I believe, if I remember correctly, like Latin America and parts of South America as well. Like
Mm.
it's all over the place. So if we were to say only this culture has a relationship with elderberry, not true. It's always been around and we've always been engaging with it. Same thing with like grasses and garlic and all of these different plants. Many plants, I just wrote a dissertation on saffron. This week I finished and published it for my students. The only reason why we have saffron today, the most luxurious, expensive spice in the world, is because it's cultivated. There is no such thing as wild crocus sativa.
Mm.
Crocus sativa exists because of like a mutant variation that happened in Crete, and then we just continued to cultivate it. And it's a sterile plant. It does not produce seeds. It is propagated by corms. So every single crocus in the world for saffron is a clone of another crocus.
Wow.
And so we have like a few thousand years of just cultivating this one plant. We have always had a relationship with plants. It would be ridiculous to say otherwise.
Yeah. I love that. I love the image of the roses too, like humans sort of having this pollinating function.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's in the plant's best interest to be like abundant and beautiful and to taste delicious.
Yeah. Oh, it
Because
is.
we will make sure that it gets spread. Coffee is a great example.
Yeah.
Again.
We will spread it, the birds will spread it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how plants have evolved on their own. And with our own ingenuity and uh, propensity for breeding plants and choosing the most robust cultivars of plants, we have supported their evolutionary process for our own benefit, but it's for their benefit too, because they get to continue to reproduce.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is such a beautiful illustration of so many of the things that you've been talking about, which is this way that we can like feed life in this like mutual way, and how humans can be a part of that cycle in a way that is, again, non-extractive. It doesn't mean that we don't use something or interact with it or consume it, but there's a way to do that that furthers life as opposed to diminishes it.
Oh, yeah, and that goes to the point of we are also a part of the community we are in.
Yeah.
Our needs also get to be met.
Mm-hmm.
Reciprocity means reciprocal, means mutual benefit. So, versus like a parasitic relationship, right, where one being is attaching to another to extract
Mm-hmm.
the resources from that being and bleed it dry in a way. Um, we don't want to be in a parasitic relationship with the earth. We want to be in a reciprocal relationship with the earth so that the earth gets its needs met. But that also means that our needs get to be met because we are a part of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So while growing a garden, as our example, is all about listening and honoring and supporting how the plants want to grow, that supportive process also means you get more cucumbers,
Yeah, it means I get like fucking delicious veggies and fruits, like all the
right?
like strawberries this year, asparagus. Like my life is good. Lunch is great.
Yeah, it's great. Now, where we begin to lean more onto the extractive side is when we start to say, oh, well, I just want to like extract as many cucumbers from this plant as I possibly can. So, regardless of the needs of the earth, I'm just going to pump it full of fertilizer.
Totally.
You know?
So that it grows
And then
twice as big, twice as fast. Or I'm like, what do we want things to grow twice
we
as
want
big,
that.
twice as fast? Is that
Is
ever a good
that
idea?
is that sustainable in the long term? Is it reciprocal on the long term? No, look at monoculture culture.
Mm-hmm.
Like, look at how modern agriculture has completely depleted the soil
Yeah.
for short-term gains and long-term devastation,
And poisoned us in the process, but yes.
right? So we get to benefit, our needs get to be met, but we still have to be thinking about the larger picture.
For sure. I agree.
It's
Which I
not all
think,
self-sacrifice,
yeah.
it's not all giving your entire self to the earth and never getting anything back, but it's also not motivated by what you're going to get back. It's
Yeah.
motivated about long-term generational thinking thousands of years into the future of supported life on this planet.
Yeah, which is thinking ecologically, which I think is what growing a plant, growing a garden, all those things start to help you do is like thinking ecologically about who you are and what you need and how you're interacting, which I think is for me anyways, has been one of the big benefits.
Yes.
So on that note, I love all of these things. Like we could talk for like 8 hours. But as we wrap it up, I would love to make room. Do you feel like there's anything that I didn't make room to say, or something that you feel like is sort of on your mind, your heart mind, that you would like to share with everyone before we find out where we can find you?
I mean, the only other thing I will add to this conversation is like plants are one of the most obvious ways to start, or connecting to plants is one of the most obvious steps to take when you're starting to create more of an ecological awareness and an animist awareness of the world, because they're everywhere and you already have a sense of familiarity with them. Because as I mentioned before, um, you are already in relationship with plants, you know, they are supporting you. I hope you're eating plants every day. That would be one example, but they're everywhere. There's a plant around you that you are familiar with, I would think. So plants are generally pretty welcoming and they're pretty forgiving. You know, you accidentally trample a plant, it will most likely grow back. Connecting with plants can be a really, really great starting point, but it's not the only one. There are so many spirits in this world that you can connect to. You could, if you have an affinity for water, something you could do to be in better relationship with the various water spirits of this world would be to like support land defenders and get involved in water advocacy. If you're really into stones and you were that kid who collected rocks, um, you know, fight against fracking and mountaintop removal. If you're a medium and have a strong relationship with ancestral spirits or land spirits or, you know, other disincarnate spirits in this world, like that can be an entryway into deeper connection. I am an herbalist, so I teach about plant focused connection because that's my training. But there are so many ways to be in relationship with the world, and like so much diversity in the inspiritedness of beings here that you can connect to. But you can't just like read about it in books. um, you have to develop relational skills,
Yeah.
and it takes work. The good news is life is actually pretty long and you have plenty of time and you don't have to figure it all out tomorrow. um, but if you want to get started, find a plant or someone in your life, um, that you feel pulled towards, and begin to approach them and build a relationship with them like you would build a relationship with a person. Just recognize that they might not communicate their needs to you in the way that humans do.
In English.
Yeah. So you're going to have to cultivate a practice of deep listening. Um, and I have a class that I recently, I hosted a class with one of my teachers and friends, Althea Sebastiani, who is a polytheist religious specialist and priest and animist, and has their teachings have very much influenced my animist worldview. I hosted a workshop with them last weekend, so the recording is available on exploring animism, and specifically exploring animism in witchcraft. And witchcraft has many definitions, but exploring witchcraft as a tool that helps us cope with the world we're in, foster connection, and build relationships. So that class is available for purchase on my website. It's like $45. And Althea is brilliant. And we were supposed to have like an hour and a half long class, and it ended up being 3 hours.
You're like, there's too much here.
Yeah, and Althea teaches incredible programs that are really rooted in animism, and developing relationships with various spirits. So I also really highly recommend them. Um, but if you're interested in some of the things that I talked about here in that class, Althea shares a practice on how to approach a plant spirit and how to begin connecting with a plant spirit and increase your ability to communicate with them. And so that's on my website on like my events page.
Cool. And where do you have anything coming up that you would like folks to know about? And what is your website? We'll have everything
Oh yeah.
listed in the show notes, but for folks who are driving right now or can't look at the show notes, do you mind telling us where we can find all your goodies and more about you?
Yeah, so my website is rowansage.com, like the tree and the herb. And I'm on Instagram and everywhere. I've been trying to figure out TikTok. I don't like it, but people say I
Mm-mm.
need to be there. So I'm there and I'm on Twitter. I'm a, I'm more planty on Instagram and more astrology-y on Twitter. Um, because that's why I got on Twitter. All the star people are there. But I'm everywhere at Rowan and Sage. It's easy to find me, and all of my social links are on my website as well. And then in terms of what I have going on, I have I host a guest class, like a guest teacher, every single month.
Wow.
So we have a lot of different classes coming up. We've got a class on like botanical and natural perfumery with April Lay from Linnea. We have a class on Islamic medicine and Inami Tib coming up with Talal Al Hamad. We'll have a class on the henna tradition in the Swana region with Medina Trevathan. Like lots of classes that will can be found on my website. Not all those three haven't all been published, but they will be soon. So I have guest classes every month, and then I have a couple of different programs available for folks of all levels. If you're brand new to herbalism and you want to just begin your plant path, you're welcome in our school. If you've been practicing for years and years and you want to learn astro herbalism, or you want to learn a particular medicine making practice, or you want to connect with a community of plant people who are trying to engage with the world through this animist way, we have programs available for you. So all of our programs are open enrollment at any time. So I don't really have one that's like launching soon. And those are all on my website. And we've got that program on astro herbalism called seasonal herbcraft, medicine making called kitchen herbcraft, have a foundations class called Vitalist Herbcraft, and a monthly membership called Herbaria, which has all of my like monographs, and it also includes access to all of those live classes with teachers and like over 100 recipes, and all sorts of stuff is living in that library.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'll put the links to the handles for everything that you mentioned below so folks can easily find it if you just go to the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on and for just sharing your world, your worldview, and your love of plants with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me.